Yeah, I'm Hannah Abbasi. I am originally from Texas. I now live in New York, and I've been here off and on for a few years. I'm going to talk about my personal journey today. So I haven't told my story in quite a while, so firstly I'm going to apologize if I jump back and forth a little bit. I'm going to try to go chronologically. Also, I'd like to request that no one records this on their personal devices, and for only Muslimish has it recorded, because I'd like to be really honest, and I'm not comfortable with everyone in the world knowing my story at this time. When people look at me, they're usually very confused about my ethnic background. And it's usually always the question, where are you from? And every single time I'm asked this, I hesitate, because for me, where am I from? Okay, I'm from Texas. And they're like, yeah, but where are you really from? I'm sure we all get this, most of us get this, like as living as Muslims in America. And I have to think again, like, okay, like I know what they want to hear. They want to hear, oh, I'm half white and half Pakistani. That's the answer they're looking for. But when I think about my identity and who I am, I feel like it's a lie to say I'm half Pakistani, because I wasn't raised as Pakistani, and as many Pakistanis are raised. So, and how is that possible? Because most people, they grow up with two parents, or sometimes there's a divorce, and there's still a lot of influence from that other side. My mother is, she was, I'll go into that later, she was a very strong Pentecostal white woman from Texas. On my mother's side, I have a long history of military. My grandfather fought in 3 wars. My great-grandfather was in World War I. So I have a very strong American background on my mother's side. My father was from Pakistan, and he came to America as the oldest of his siblings, and he had a lot of responsibility. He also had a wife in Pakistan and 3 daughters, and he told my mother, oh, I'm divorced, my wife and I are separated. It was a green card marriage, and my mother didn't know that. She wasn't aware that it was a green card marriage. So a few years later, after my brother and I were born, obviously things didn't quite work out. There was a lot of miscommunication and different expectations, since she was very religious and my father was very culturally Pakistani. He also came from a small village, even though much of his family now lives in Karachi. So he had very traditional viewpoints as well. After when I was just a few years old, my parents divorced, and my father then went back to Pakistan for a wedding, for his younger sister's wedding. And while he was there, he was in a small village, and he had a problem with his heart, and so he passed away. So I was raised with my mother's family, but at that point, my parents were already divorced, and we didn't have any communication between the two sides. So I grew up in a very strong Pentecostal household. I went to church multiple times a week, Sunday morning, sometimes Sunday evening, depending on activities that week. I went every Wednesday night for youth group, and sometimes Friday evenings for Bible study. And it was within this atmosphere that I cultivated my understanding of religion as something that you devote yourself to 110%. And so as I got a little older, I became more involved in the church. I was the youngest of my mother's children, but I was also the most responsible, and I feel that there were a lot of expectations put on me to be someone who was involved with the church. And I was also like the most obedient one, so I went to church, rather like my brother, who eventually started to rebel and would throw tantrums about going to church. I went with my mother to adult Bible study, and I studied the Bible thoroughly. I went on missionary trips, and it was actually on my second missionary trip to Vietnam and Cambodia that I chose to leave Christianity. So at this time, I chose to leave Christianity because I didn't feel the same connection that I saw others in the church have around me. And for those of you who are familiar with evangelicals or the Pentecostal faith, you'll know that speaking in tongues is a very big part of the faith, and it is a sign that you are saved. So no matter how much I tried and how much I prayed to God to allow me to speak in tongues and to give me that gift of salvation, I was never granted it. And in part, I believe that was because I wasn't willing to fake it. And I believe it must be sincere and it must be from the heart. So I left Christianity, but I wasn't very obvious about it. I still went with my mom to church. And it was between the ages of 13 and 15 that I was just generally agnostic. Also at 13, after I had already left Christianity, I met my father's family for the first time, and most of them live in England. So I've also, to today, I've never been to Pakistan, but I have visited that family in England for summer vacations growing up, after the age of 13. It was on my second trip to England that I met Salafi relatives, and I started to ask them questions about Islam. When I left Christianity, it was mainly because I had specific issues and questions that were never answered, and eventually I was told to just have faith, and that wasn't good enough for me to just have faith. And so when I encountered, when I was told about and taught about Islam, it answered some of those questions, issues such as original sin, and there were many more things that I had conflict with in Christianity. So when I was given da'wah by the Salafis, it was very appealing to me, but I still doubted and I wasn't sure. Eventually I was sort of pushed to take the Shahada, and so I decided, these little doubts, maybe I should just have faith, because there's nothing really standing out to say I shouldn't. So I accepted Islam, and because I knew religion to be a lifestyle, something you do 110%, I jumped right in. I started to wear niqab within the year. I started hijab within a few months after I got home back to Texas, and shortly after I started wearing abaya, and I was wearing niqab within 6 months of that. In Texas. I grew up right outside of Austin, so it is a bit more liberal, but at my high school of over 2,000 kids, I was the only Muslim. And so there was very little education about Islam. My friends tended to be the, more rebellious types, and so they completely 100% supported me wearing niqab and looking different. And anytime somebody looked at me or said something, they're like, "Don't look at my friend. What's your problem? What are you looking at?" And so I never had to defend myself. They always did it for me. And it was great to have that support group. They didn't really understand what I was doing, but they supported me nonetheless. So my first 2 years, I converted right before junior year of high school. And that really tainted my experiences in high school. Junior and senior year are the years that we tend to explore and experiment with more things. And so that sort of, because I got so religious, I sort of limited myself to certain avenues of exploration. And those were mainly like faith and philosophy and education rather than, drugs and alcohol and boys. So the height of my Salafism was actually at the end of my senior year, and I started going online. I had gotten a computer at home. This was back when computers were kind of a big deal to get. I had a desktop computer. It was like a Dell, and I was so proud of it. And I started making YouTube videos. I would listen to conferences, Salafi conferences online, and I record them, and then make videos to go with them, so people could see the ayah that's referenced in the speech, and I put all these really cool graphics, and I thought it was so cool making these YouTube videos for all the Salafis out there. And it was my own personal da'wah, right? Because I wanted everyone to know the truth, because obviously the Salafi Islam is the correct Islam. And I 100% believed that at the time. It was during this time, the summer before college, that I found chat rooms, and I started talking to people, and I discovered, Salafi Islam is not the only type of Islam that is out there and that people actually believe. I always thought there's cultural Muslims and then there's Salafi Muslims. That's it. There's two types. Cultural Muslims, they don't really pray, they might drink sometimes. And then there's the Salafis, and they're the right ones, and everyone should listen to them. But then I discovered, there are other types of Muslims. And during this time, I had become very involved in a Salafi masjid in my city. And so they were my new best friends. All the women were my best friends. We all wore niqab, and it was this little club. And I thought it was so cool. We're the the niqabi, the niqabi club. So I was also the youngest. So in terms of being a young, untouched, untouched young woman who's a niqabi in the community, you're kind of
your age.
You're the one all the men are looking at, you're oh, she's a niqabi, oh, she hasn't been married before, oh, blah, blah, blah. So I got a lot of proposals in this time too. And at the time when I was going to college, I got a full ride into UT Austin. And so I also only applied, besides UT Austin, I only applied to all-girls schools in the, across the U.S. because I was like, oh, I shouldn't be mixing with men because that's haram. So, but I got a full ride, so I was like, okay, I'm just gonna go to UT, and then I'll just make female friends, and it'll be fine, and it's not haram. So, so that's what I was thinking. And then when I got there, the first thing I did was make male friends, apparently. And many of them were Shia. And this was the first time I met Shia as well. So when I was meeting people online, I started to open up to realize there can be other types of Muslims who practice who are not necessarily Salafi. So I felt it was my duty to teach them that, no, you should be Salafi. And when I got into college, I went on to meet more people, try to covertly convert them to Salafi Islam. But I also was learning so much myself, and I was learning about other types of Muslims. Okay, so I'm seeing I have like 5 minutes, and I have so much more to tell, so I'm gonna have to speed it up. So, let's see, where to go from here? All right. Short version now. I met some Shia, and one of these Shia was actually my, I started taking Arabic because I had planned, I'm going to go marry a guy, a Salafi guy, and go to Saudi Arabia, and I'm going to study. That was my plan. I was like, who needs college when I'm going to marry like a guy who's going to take care of me? I'm going to have some babies. That didn't last for very long. Within a year, I was like,
who want to go to the desert growing up in America?
I'm from Texas. I like the heat, so that was fun. And it was more about like you're going to go and study and you're going to be a scholar and I'm going to marry a scholar and he's going to be so big and important. And I was going to be the scholar's wife, and that's a pretty big deal in the community. So that was the plan. That changed pretty fast. So then I took an Arabic class, obviously my first semester, and the TA was a PhD student who actually happened to be the imam at the Shia Masjid. And so I started to go to his TA sessions, for the Arabic TA sessions, and started asking questions about Islam and about Shia Islam. And so we started debating about things. Short story, within this first year, my freshman year in college, I did a lot of research on Islamic history, on hadith, and started to reassess what I had been taught and what I had taught myself. At this point, I was very knowledgeable, and most of my friends came to me about hadith they had read. I could quote Sahih Bukhari and Muslim to you so easily. So when it came time to the debate between Sunni and Shia, I was ready. I was ready to tell them oh, look at these hadith. And come to find out, Shia used completely different books of hadith. So, so that was I learned new things, to prove them wrong. And all right, so here's where it gets interesting. When I started to study about Shia Islam, I realized it kind of came to this one point. Actually, I think the one thing, there were two issues that I was really debating with that when the Shias were debating with me, they would take from Sunni books to prove me wrong. And this was a really effective method because if they showed me Shia hadith, I'd be like, oh yeah, but that's not accurate. That's not real. Those are falsified. But they showed me Sunni hadith. And so the two issues of contention one was the age of Aisha. And Sunnis tend to accept that she was 9 years old. And Shias say, no, she was 16. And others say, oh, she could have even been 18. So I was proved wrong within Sunni books of hadith about her age, and there was so much evidence that I was like, oh, okay, this isn't something I can deny. But I wasn't really fully prepared yet to just move on, okay, I was proved wrong about this one thing. The next issue was muta, which is temporary marriage, and about the permissibility of it, and about where it comes from, what it is, and how it's practiced. So after these two issues were, I was proven wrong in them, it kind of broke something in me, and it broke that arrogance and that certainty that I had. I had even with Sam, I think Sam said this earlier, someone did about yaqeen, I had so much certainty that I was right. So that when I was proven wrong, it never allowed me to be fully certain ever again when it came to my faith. So I became Shia, but there was always this part of me that was in the back, questioning, oh, but is that truly correct? Oh, what about this? And I would always, I started to practice diligently just as I had as a Sunni. I continued to wear niqab. I wore niqab through college. But it never allowed me to be fully comfortable. So I'll speed up a little bit. After college, I majored in Middle Eastern studies, religious studies, and history. And it was a little easy to do this because I just overlapped classes a lot, and I decided to graduate a semester early so that I could go to Iran and study Islam more. So my Arabic TA, the Imam at the Shia Masjid, him and I developed a very close, like, academic and religious relationship. Nothing inappropriate. He was married, and he got me. He connected me with a group that was having a conference in Qom, Iran, for converts to Islam. So I got a free ticket to Iran, and then I went to the conference. It was really interesting and great. And then I wanted to stay and study, and that was the whole point. So he put me in contact with people who could help me to get into Jamiat al-Zahra, which is a very prestigious Islamic school for women in Iran. And Qom is kind of the center of religious education in Iran, so it's a pretty big deal. And within the Shia world, it's a pretty big deal. There's a few locations that are particularly important. So I went off to Qom, and my Shia community was so proud of me. And while I was there, I took off my niqab. There's more to this, but I think I'm probably already over time. So you can ask me questions later if you want. So I took off my niqab at this time, and I started to question things a lot more during the 6 months that I was there. I was enrolled in a program in which I could have stayed to study 10 years if I wanted to. But after a few months, I realized this isn't where I want to be, and this isn't. Studying Islam is, in this context, is not what I want to be doing. So I suppose taking off niqab was the first step in that, and realizing and understanding my own reasons for wearing niqab in the first place. So I left, and well, before I left, I was like, okay, I can't just like go back to Texas. I need to have a plan. So I enrolled in AmeriCorps, and I got a job in New York, and I came to work with youth in the Bronx. So I lived here for a year. And in that year, I started wearing pants again. I took off my abaya, and I was just wearing like a normal scarf. It looked like any normal hijabi. And that's when I started talking to like just everyday Muslims. And I had never actually been around just everyday Muslims. I'd always been in very conservative circles of Muslims. And I had one conversation in which somebody changed my view on listening to music. From the age of 16 to 21, I didn't listen to any music. And so I know nothing about anyone who was popular at that time. I didn't know anything about famous movies or like all the interesting things on TV. And so I was a bit socially inept as well, because I had nothing to talk about. I only could talk to you about religion, and most people didn't want to talk about religion. So I started listening to music again, and towards the end of that year, I actually met someone who was very religious as a Jew. And so we started to debate, and we had a very close relationship. But he wasn't a traditional Jew. He was like me in the way I was as a Shia, in that I questioned things, and I took a more unorthodox approach to religion and practicing it, although I was very practicing of it. And so he planted some seeds in my mind about the roots of Islam and where it actually came from, and we started to debate about things. His goal was to convert me to Judaism, and that didn't work in his favor. But I was still like, you know what? I studied Arabic for 3 years in college, and I'm now more open about things, and I want to go back to the Middle East, but on my terms. So I booked a one-way flight to Lebanon after my year in New York, and and so I was there for 3 months. If I'm going too long, you can just tell me.
Yeah.
2 minutes?
Yeah, look,
2 minutes?
I'm really excited to hear the end of this story. I think my...
She's almost done anyway. You're
Almost done. All right. So I went to Lebanon, and at this time I was still wearing hijab. I still had a lot of close ties to the Muslim community. I got very involved in the Muslim community in New York in that year I was here. But when I went to Lebanon, I was like, okay, I'm gonna see what I can do in the world. I was still wearing hijab when I got there. I enrolled in a sister hosa, a sister seminary from the one in Iran, and so I had that connection in Iran, and it was easy to then go ahead and enroll in this one in Lebanon. However, I lived on the edge of a Hezbollah-controlled area, so it wasn't quite safe. And so after a few months, and a few too many bombings near my home, I decided I should go ahead and book a ticket to Egypt. All right, but before I left, I was like, you know what? I have a lot of things going on in my mind, and I need to figure out where I stand with my faith and with my journey before the next step. Before I get on that plane, I want to know who I am and what I'm doing. So I did a lot of contemplation. I did a lot of praying. And then I decided, you know what, I'm going to do a lot of not praying. And this is the first time I'm going to deliberately not pray. That first day, I was like, oh my God, it's Lord time, I'm going to hell. And then I got through the first few days, and it was like, you know what, okay, I can do this. Like, maybe I can not pray. And I actually wrote down the exact day in which prayer I started not praying, so that I can make it up just in case. But I didn't need to, so it's fine. So during that trip as well, while I lived in Beirut, I met some European friends, and none of them were religious. So I traveled with them outside of Beirut, and that's when I first didn't wear my hijab a few times too. And so that was kind of weird, and I felt very naked and strange as I went out with my hair showing, and I felt like, oh my God, I'm cold everywhere, and so it was a little strange, but I experimented with it, and I felt like this is actually the right thing. I did a lot of other research. I spent a couple weeks just studying and deciding before I got on that plane. So when I got on the plane to Egypt, I had made up my mind, and I took off my hijab, stepped foot in Egypt, and I was a new person, and no one knew me, and I could be anyone I wanted to be. So I lived in Egypt off and on for about a year and a half. In that time, I came back to New York for a little bit, went back to Egypt, and I kind of recreated myself since then. That was about 3.5 years ago, and now I'm back in New York again, and figuring out who I'm going to be in the future, I guess.
Tel Aviv, you should take a nice trip down there.
All right.